Hi, I'm Akira.
And I'm Rohan.
Welcome to The Long Take. This week we're discussing the new remake or like only sort of Hindi remake of The Great Indian Kitchen. It's called Mrs. And after like a long film festival sort of like tour, it's finally on streaming. Stars Sanya Malhotra in the lead, replacing Nimish Sisjan. And it's directed by Arati Kadav, who I think made the Carbo, like sci-fi movie. It's cast on this podcast a couple of years back. Yeah, what do you make of the movie on?
I thought it was fine. It wasn't terrible, but then it had big shoes to fill, and anybody who's seen the original will just be like, "Why would I watch this over that?" Because it makes no sense.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna go out there, then be the devil's advocate here and then say that I think it's a improvement on the original.
In what way?
I think the script is stronger, like beat to beat. I think it's better directed in cases actually, and it's full of small touches which I feel original sort of sometimes lack.
Hmm. Now, I watched the original when it came out, and I remember being very, very impressed with it. And from what I recall, is that that was more visually driven as opposed to this one. I remember the being very impressed, in fact, by the direction of it, like just the repetitive nature of it felt like a pressure cooker. Watching that film. Similar to how, like Uncut Gems feels like a pressure cooker. So you're just waiting for her to kind of explode.
Yeah, and I feel like I felt that more with Mrs. than that one.
Okay. So I felt that this one, they were maybe a little too on the nose in certain scenes. Like she would verbalize her issues, especially towards the end also. Like there is a lot of here's what I'm feeling as
Right.
opposed to letting, which I feel is more effective because you're working with an audience, at least some members of the audience who might watch this and not even realize what's wrong. So it works better if you allow them to experience what this character is going through as opposed to the character saying what she's going through.
Yeah, I largely agree. Although in one aspect, like visually, this movie does better in terms of the sex scenes of like, how the torture that she's going through. In Greeting Nature, I feel like they usually cut around it or it's just like her face and they don't really show like, the lack of consent of like how he's just like on her and she has like no
Mhm.
control. Like I feel like this one communicates that better. And in terms of like the smaller touches I was referencing, like there are parts to it, initially in the first 20 minutes before the mother-in-law leaves to see her daughter for the pregnancy thing, you can sense how like there's a full, I mean, I don't want to use the term because it implies something else, but like it's like a well-oiled machine, right? Like she's always on it. She knows
Hmm.
exactly what her husband needs and she's like predicting like, huh, the slippers are there before he needs the slippers. In Kitchen in Kitchen, he's waiting for it and then she's given the slippers. I feel like those kind of touches sort of really elevated the movie for me.
I mean, I suppose I mean, in this one, like it's like rape, right? I mean, I don't think the movie is also playing that ambiguously what happens to her.
Yeah, it is real.
Uh,
Yeah.
but what I did not like was the speech that she gives him about, like I also have desires, etc., etc. And I thought, okay, so did you have to kind of say that out loud? Because again, a lot of people would watch this and perhaps be behaving in a similar way. And the difference is, if are you making a film or are you making like a college lecture or something?
Yeah, but the
And I think you can.
Great Indian Kitchen has a similar scene where I don't know if she
Mm,
calls out her desire per se, but like the foreplay mention is completely intact. It's like
mm,
kept
mm.
the same. And in the
Yep.
both the cases, the husband says the same thing, like there has to be something to desire.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, I just felt perhaps it was maybe the language that I didn't understand. It would either just be that, because here it feels a little too literal,
Hmm.
and that could very easily be because of the language. Uh, but then when you hear it being spelled out, you're like, oh, okay, kind of got that. But then there were many instances of that happening. The biggest question that I had going into this movie was, of course, the temple stuff, right?
Hmm.
Which was my least favorite thing about the original.
Because it felt like
Which
forced or something else.
Yeah, it just felt like, oh, so you're now using that as like a metaphor for this, but
Yeah.
like we get it. Although I also understand why you would do it because it's so like topical and it ties in with the themes, and it's a nice juxtaposition of doing like an intimate kind of family drama, but then the sweeping statement, and both of them are supposed to kind of talk about the same thing. So I get the idea behind it. It
Hmm.
just in execution, it felt like a little
Wisdom.
clunky.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and also felt like, I watched it again, like after this one, to sort of, feel like, what they were changing and stuff like that. And there is like a slight, I mean, I get the repetition of like why they want to repeat something like visually, but they're also
Mm.
sometimes harp on the same beat as well, of like there's a long period where, because this Sabriva, I think like in this one, the period break sort of thing when she gets on her period is treated in a much different manner. Like they go towards her dance career and she gets this sort of freedom to like enjoy. In that, in her period, she's just confined into her room. Right? It's almost like a jail thing. And
Yeah,
that
I remember that being very like a prison, right? It was
it
very,
is
very
like a
harsh.
funnily prison. Yeah, it's a instantly like a prison. And what they keep
Mm.
harping on there, which they don't as much here, is that she's almost like an untouchable during that period, right? Like her husband gets into like a mini accident and she tries to help him, and he's like, no, no, don't touch me. And then he takes a full bath. There's like a 2 minute sequence where like he goes on like purifying himself, and they're like, you should drink cow dung, some urine or some nonsense. So
Mm.
they were really harping on that again, and like again, like there's another scene where like she touches the basil plant because she has a cold, and that father-in-law like scolds her of like, how can you touch the holy basil plant?
Mm.
Those kind of repetition actually felt like took it away from me, but like in this one, because as you said, like they don't have this temple thing, it allowed the movie to go back to her personal nature of like, oh, she's able to reconnect with her dancing sort of
Mm.
practice, which like had been pulled away from her since marriage.
Mm. I mean, yeah, I get that, but then I also get that the fundamental difference also between these two films and these two characters is that that one feels more like less urban.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, it makes sense for them to have like, I mean, just the men have very strange beliefs as it is, but then it would make sense for them to have weirder beliefs like the Tulsi and all that,
Yeah.
like cow dung. That it makes sense in that world. Here, it's very clearly an urban setting, and as kind of evidence in that dinner party scene, which was it feels like a break from the rest of the movie. And
I love that scene because suddenly like they were placed in a world where like because you can essentially question those things, right? When like this making her do, she's like desperately asking for like a maid, like, no, can you just get us some help in the house? And clearly like there's not shortage of money here, like he's a gynecologist, so there's like a family like profession, so they clearly like have a business, so they have money around, so it's not like an issue. They can clearly like get her help. They don't want to, like they don't these men don't even think in that direction of that, that we can alleviate the burden. No, this is like, हाँ ये करेगी, इसका काम थोड़ी है, मतलब this is like कुछ करना है like घर पे, इसलिए they don't even
I don't remember what it was like in the original in too much detail, but am I wrong in saying that in this one the dudes felt a little more evil through their words? Because I remember in the original it felt like very matter of fact for them. Here it felt like they were actually doing it out of spite. I don't know. Again, that could just be a language thing, or
maybe, but I
maybe
feel
they
like I
just.
actually, the urban setting actually like I preferred that in some way because it shows that it really hits at this, like we have this mindset that just because people have education and they're like of a certain progressive class, like suddenly they have like everything is progressive in their mindset. But the fact that they made him a gynecologist who like works with like treats women patients is actually a better in a way instead than having him like a school teacher who was teaching or whatever nonsense in that one, because it shows
But
that
then again, I felt this was more on the nose, right?
right,
Because
on the nose, but I
the
think it actually works better in the sense because he can be like, he can literally be dating women and like thinking about female anatomy, but at the same time be so backward, which is like polar opposite in his like the moment he steps into his household.
okay. Now, so I'll tell you why I felt like the original had a better, was more effective in communicating these ideas, because they're both basically communicating the same
Yeah.
ideas. Now, the thing is, the original, for either the setting or the language or whatever reason, felt like a slightly removed from especially my universe, right? And what made it so effective was that you could watch this essentially a foreign language film. It could be like Spanish or whatever, or Thai, and you could be like, oh my God, I have seen that happen, right? And that realization has a stronger cinematic effect than watching something that is more or less in your universe, like an urban setting, and then be like, oh yeah, because then the effect isn't as magnified, because then you're like, oh okay, for the longest time you're kind of shielding your own hypocrisies also, right? Here are the behaviors that I have been indulging in because I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that people, from B tier, C tier cities who probably aren't as privileged, they have backward ideas. But the movie kind of makes you realize, no, no, every person has similar backward ideas. It doesn't really depend on
Where
uh,
they're living, where they're
yeah.
from. Yeah.
Correct. But in this one, it felt like, oh, these, like, of course, these are people that I might know. And sure, they're behaving in a very obnoxious manner. So the impact of it wasn't as strong, and that could very easily be because I've seen this movie already. You know?
Yeah, I think that is definitely part of it. Like, like it would be a better film. It's just like if it was an original film, which it isn't, and it's just like that is the sort of gamble you take with doing a remake, right? Is that a factor, especially with the in your remake a movie that was already like loved. Is that you so essentially it feels like you're standing on the shoulder of giants, but you're not really, because then you are sort of also catering to an audience if they've not watched. Like, I mean, yeah, one aspect is that when you remake a movie that's from a different world itself, is that people may not even have know of the original, so it's fine to like remake for a different country or language or whatever. In this one, you're almost it's people might have seen that one already, right? So you're fighting against that sort of almost like, I guess, in a way, belief is at some level, which like happened for you, it will happen for a lot of others. But at the same time, like, because it's like closer to our world, it's actually sometimes like hit more for me, in fact, because like that's family dinner scene where like like he's just like, yeah, like stop talking about dishes. I'll just put in a dishwasher, right? Like that's what it is. Like
Mm,
it's so basic. Like they have the money for it, but nahi, at
mm,
every level, they will be like, no, do it by hand. Chutney banani hai by
mm,
hand. Don't use mixer. Kapde dhone hai,
mm,
do it by hand. They have a washing
mm.
machine. They can just like everything can be just simplified, which like it's
Yeah.
harder because I know people around me who are doing
Mm,
the same thing on some level. Like they could be making their lives easier. They're spending like lakhs on foreign vacations, but they won't have a dishwasher at home, right? So in that sense, it's almost like, why? Why are you doing this? Why are you making your lives harder? And it's not even making your lives harder. You're making the female person individual's life harder always.
yeah.
Because the burden is borne by them always at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I fully agree that watching this, the anger that I felt while
Hmm,
watching the original, it was still there, which I was very surprised by.
hmm, hmm.
Because that's just, I guess it's one of those stories where it would take a real fool to kind of mess up, right? Like if you just show this on screen in this manner, then you're going to feel aggravated.
Yeah, like it's a full like
And
that. The pressure cooker thing you mentioned. It was like a full domestic situation. I was just like, I'm scared for her. I'm like, kya hone wala next? Like, what is going to
it
happen to her?
also, yeah, it also helps that she's very good, like Sanya
Yeah.
Malhotra, at playing these characters, right? Where I felt like Nimisha Sajan was, when I watched that, I was like, oh my God, like my mind is blown. How good is she? But here I watch it, and the biggest difference that between these two films, beyond just like the superficial stuff that we've talked about, the setting, etc., is I think her performance, right? Because she is baffled. She is baffled in this world. She's like, what is happening to me? What am I supposed to do? Like, I have been taught certain things, and I don't want to like step out of line, but I'm also so angry and I'm also so disappointed. And she's able to kind of do that wordlessly in so many scenes, right? You can sense the anger and just the helplessness. And I think she's very good in this
She's
movie.
very good. What I also liked is that which is a nice change again for me, at least personally, is that she's been brought up in a way that she tries to impress them, right? And like in the original, she's just making whatever knows how to make. It's like a semi like rural setting, not as urban. So
Hmm.
maybe like her condition of her approach to the world is like jo khate hai, just bana do, and like they're happy with this. In this one, she tries to go above and beyond, right? Like I love that whole scene where the cook comes out of the YouTube channel and then she's trying to like she's going the extra mile of like, no, ये work नहीं करा. Maybe if I do better, maybe if I make something else, then they'll be impressed and they'll compliment me, right? She doesn't give up
Hmm.
for like 2-3 weeks or whatever when the mother is gone. And she tries and tries and tries and nothing impresses them. Like they will like just take everything for granted and then they'll pinpoint something random and like, हाँ इसमें नमक better था. I'm like, what?
Hmm. Now, here's that's another thing that I did not really like as much as I did in the original, because it shouldn't be about the amount of effort or extra effort that you put into a meal, right? It shouldn't be about, oh, maine dum biryani banai hai, as opposed to a pulao, right? They keep saying that if you make it with love, that's all that matters. So even if you make like, say, a simple chapati, right? And you pour your heart and soul into making it perfect and they don't like it, it will be just as like aggravating
Well,
as
I think what they're trying to show is
making a
their spoiled nature, right? Like they don't want 4 chapatis in a box. They want a fulka which has been made 3 seconds ago.
correct, but then the effect that has is just as strong as making a biryani, as making a dum biryani and then having them say कि ये तो अच्छा नहीं है, because the point is that वो तो कर रही है. Now the food shouldn't matter, right? And certainly the the aesthetic nature of the photography is not does not belong in this movie, right? Because that's not the point. We're not making a chef's table.
Yeah.
The focus should be on her face as she's making it. Like she is doing it through a pure heart, and then she's not being appreciated. So I felt that khana is not important. So तुम थोड़ा सा sidetrack हो रहे हो here by making it like, one of those Netflix shows. But I guess if I'm angry at Kawaljeet Singh, then you're getting the job done. So I can't kind of deny that. And I'm very angry at Kawaljeet Singh.
Yeah, is apparent. Like, I want to pick up
Yeah.
on one thing you just mentioned is that, like the focus on her face, that I felt the strongest in the final scene, which I did not. I do not like the ending. I like the touch of, the office that the retained what from the original of like showing that, they just replaced her nonchalant, not even thinking about it. There's a new wife. But of having a full glamorized like Bollywood style production of like, where she becomes like a dancer. Like, I want to go back to the comment you made about like her face. Like, that's what that Sheen should have done instead of shooting it like fully wide and showing the extravagant nature of the production and how she's putting up like a big dance show, which just shows like, oh, she's like fine. She's succeeding in her life and she's fine on her own. I would have loved it if that scene was like, like something like Black Swan, just like either zoom in on her face in the beginning or like slowly just like go towards her face, like show her like, despite like going through the trauma she's going through, she's like whatever, like escaping that. Do not shoot like random three establishing white shots of this auditorium and then her dancing and whole group. Like, it doesn't convey anything for me. And that isn't even cut properly, right? It just like becomes half the frame and then credits start rolling. It was very unsatisfying.
It felt like a weird, like, theatrical movie thing, right? Where they kind of reduce it to a little box and the credits start rolling.
Yeah.
It's very strange. But I remember, and I remember speaking about this in the Kadal episode that we did also, is that in both Great Indian Kitchen and Kadal, I thought the movies were excellent, but the endings were weak because the endings were semi-fantasy and they didn't feel like they belonged in a movie that harsh. Like we were reaching a little bit to
Yeah.
take
I would
to
have
wrap
loved it
things
if
up.
both movies actually ended back in the original kitchen of these
Yeah.
assholes
No,
with the
the
new
perfect
wife.
ending is right there. No, the
Exactly. The
perfect ending.
perfect ending is
Yeah.
that leaving it on the fact that they just replaced her and like don't even think about the old
Yeah.
one. That
That's
is your ending.
right. That's the perfect ending. But then the both movies
Are
and the
spoiling
first
it.
one, yeah, the first one spoiled it, and even Kadal, to a degree, I was very disappointed by the ending because they literally ride off into the sunset.
Britain Kitchen, like I also raise it, and ending in a way, in a different way, I don't like it, is that it makes the character passive. Like, she's not dancing. She's just standing there looking at her students and it's very passive for me. Like, and she needs to be involved in some way.
Yeah, I mean, in this one, I was kind of hoping against hope that they kind of realize that we have a great ending and we
Yeah.
don't need to
Yeah.
do that.
Just like
But
chop off the dance scene. It's like an item member.
yeah, but then it's too. I mean, that was too.
Yeah, either you chop it off
Too.
or you do what I just said. It has to be like just like on her face the entire time, and you show her going from like like
Yes.
celebrating the joy of dance again because she's getting something she has been deprived of for like whatever a year or half a year. So to relive that, like I need to see the jubilance on her face.
Yeah, it was more annoying in the Great Indian Kitchen because I remember thinking that, oh, this movie is so close to being perfect. Uh, and but here I'm like, okay, so you're making the same mistakes, yeah, that movie made, which is defeats the point of remake. So I mean, it's fine, I guess. It could have been much, much worse. But just the nature of the story is such that where I'm like, it 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 makes you it makes you feel certain things, and as long as it's doing that, then I'm guessing it's doing its job. So I can't really complain about it too much.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed actually. I like
Yeah.
as I mentioned, this touches and everywhere. Like even stuff like, that when she's coming into the household, like they make the whole like, nahi apna right foot use karo, right hand use karo, stuff like that, like all of that.
Yeah, I thought that was okay. Just not very nicely performed by the Bua, that moment.
Therefore
Right,
she's a little,
too on the nose,
yeah,
being
that,
evil.
yeah.
Yeah, just do it casually. No, do it nicely. In fact, nahi beta, because they don't realize it's wrong.
Yeah.
But here, the performances of so many people are almost as if they've been told that you're the villain, right? Which I feel is perhaps if you watch the original, you're like, "Acha, हाँ, I'm the villain है ही." So there's a tendency to play it that way if you don't have a great direction. But that could just be my fault because I know that they're the villains, you know?
Yeah, I didn't feel it that much
Then
with the husband character. I felt like, because like, when she would complain about the plumber, it's almost like he would listen from his one ear and just like let it out the other ear. He could not even respond. And then
Mm.
he just like turns on her like he's has expert manipulator and gaslighter of like taking a situation where he's at fault, but then he makes it about her somehow and like blames her about it.
But then I was also like, why don't you call the plumber?
I mean, that's the kind of world they want to show, right? Is that she has no autonomy.
Matlab, no, but you decided to apply for a job. You've done all that process. There's, access to the internet, etc., etc. You're going out. You're almost like, there isn't enough reason for you to not call the
Yeah, yeah.
plumber.
But like,
Because it's
but
money.
apply to the same original movie as well. Like, just why
Yeah.
God she's just called the plumber. Yeah.
Nay, I mean, it's good. I like Sanya Malhotra. She's always good. I don't think I've seen her in a bad movie, but I don't think I've seen her be bad in much. She's very good.
Right. Perfect note to end on then.
Yeah.
That's all for this episode of The Long Take. You can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Threads at The Long Take Pod. You can write to us at thelongtakepod@gmail.com. Please leave us a rating and a review wherever you see the episode, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening.